Last episode, we asked the question, what is coffee? Today, we're gonna dive into what is espresso. There's this seemingly mysterious thing in the coffee industry called espresso. We've all heard it, and we've all seen espresso menus that include things like macchiatos and cappuccinos and lattes. But depending on where you go, it can be increasingly difficult to know what you're ordering. Here's what I mean. When I turned 18, graduated high school, I moved out of state for school. I had a friend invite me to a local coffee shop, and I liked coffee, but at the time didn't really know that much about it. So I told him, hey, just order it for me. And so he ordered us each a cappuccino. I knew that it had espresso in it, but it was small. Also, I liked it. It was really delicious. There was no sugar or anything like that added to it, but there was this natural sweetness that was really, really pleasant and kind of addicting. Fast forward a couple of weeks later, I'm on a road trip driving home to go visit my family. And of course, I'm tired. I'm driving. So I stop, of all places, at a gas station. I walk in, I'm thinking, espresso. And they have one of these big automated machines that have a bunch of buttons on it and have words like cappuccino. I saw something that said caramel or vanilla cappuccino or something like that, and I pressed on it, and what it gave me was this huge, giant, 24-ounce, sweet, sugary thing. That sent me down this crazy research rabbit hole at the time. I spent hours trying to get to the bottom of the question of how can this place and this place both tell me that they're selling me a cappuccino, but give me something wildly different. What is a cappuccino? For that matter, what is espresso? What is going on here? Now, when my friend invited me out and bought me that cappuccino, I highly doubt that he knew he was gonna send me down this research rabbit hole and that research rabbit hole would never end. I'm still in that research rabbit hole and have made a career out of that research rabbit hole. So on the most basic level, what is espresso? Espresso is just a very small, very strong cup of coffee. It usually only takes somewhere between 25 to 30 seconds to brew. It's brewed using pressure, whereas your home brewer, that's going to take a few minutes and it's going to be through what's called a drip method. Completely different situation with espresso. You're using pressure to get a small amount of very strong coffee in about 25 to 30 seconds. A good shot of espresso will have this beautiful brown, creamy foam. That's called the crema. Now, some coffee shops are going to brew 1 ounce at a time, but that's increasingly less popular. Boston Stoker has always brewed 2 ounces of espresso at a time. You might call that a set of espresso shots, or what's more commonly known as a double shot. So all that to say, what is espresso? Well, it's just another way to brew coffee. As far as the history of espresso goes, it comes from Italy. That's why all of the names of the espresso drinks sound Italian. There was a guy in Italy experimenting with how to brew his coffee faster and developed this pressure system. To this day, this is just how Italians brew their coffee. If you visit Italy and sit in one of their local coffee shops, you will hear Italians come up to the counter and order un caffè. They're asking for 1 coffee, and what they are going to get from their barista is espresso. So if you're anything like me, the first thing you're probably asking is, well, if that's the case, then what's the difference between a coffee bean and an espresso bean? And the answer is, they're both coffee beans. In other words, when we designed our legendary espresso blend, we didn't have to go find espresso farms. We just selected coffees that we knew would work well together to create a delicious, complex, lovely shot of espresso.
Our espresso blend is currently made with 4 coffees. That is the Colombia Alma del Cafe Excelso, the Uganda Anaerobic, the Honduras Walter Laura, and the El Salvador Romania Natural. Each one of those coffees were chosen because of their unique attributes that come together to create our blend. Colombia Alma we use because of the sweetness, the nuttiness that it brings. Uganda brings a lot of citrus, a lot of acidity. The Romania brings sweetness and fruitiness.
So something that I love to do is take our legendary espresso blend and just make a regular cup of coffee with it, like a pot of coffee or a pour over or something along those lines. Your just classic mug of coffee. And because it's a blend of coffees that create these complex layers of flavor, you end up with a really delicious cup. There's notes of berry and citrus and chocolate, and it's got a nuttiness to it. It's really complex and really fun just as a regular cup of coffee, and that's also why it works so well when brewed as espresso. In other words, it's all just coffee, right? If you want to try your hand at espresso, you can brew espresso at home. They make some pretty affordable home brewing espresso machines that do a pretty good job. A more affordable option would be something like this Compresso. I have one of these at home. As opposed to a machine, you're using your hand to create the pressure yourself, and it creates another pretty good shot of espresso. But if you've never just sipped on espresso by itself before, I encourage you stop by your local Boston Stoker coffee shop and order one, and it'll be served with a glass of seltzer sparkling water on the side to help cleanse your palate. It is a pretty intense cup of coffee, but it is delicious. Once you get used to it, you'll really notice all of the complex, wonderful flavors that go into our legendary espresso blend. So how we're going to wrap up here is actually by talking through a traditional Italian espresso menu. This is where you hear words like macchiato and cappuccino. Well, let's talk about what those are. With espresso, it's typically combined with steamed milk. All of these drinks are just adding more and more steamed milk to your espresso. Now, as we walk through this, you'll see exactly what I mean by that. So let's start with the least amount of milk, which would be a macchiato. I'm sure you've heard this term before, but a traditional macchiato, all it is a set of espresso, and what you do is you take foam from your steamed milk off the top and you mark the top of the espresso with it. In fact, that's where you get the term macchiato. That's Italian for marked. The reason why they did this is, let's say you go to a local coffee shop in Italy with a couple of friends, and 3 of you order espresso, but only 1 of you want milk in your espresso, and just a little bit. Well, because of the crema, it's actually kind of hard to tell which one has milk. And so what they started doing was marking the top of the espresso that had milk in it so that you could tell which one was which. And again, a traditional macchiato is going to be served with some sparkling water, seltzer water on the side. So that said, you might have heard the term macchiato with bigger chains doing something like a caramel macchiato. What is that? It's just espresso and milk, but it's much bigger as opposed to a small cup of coffee. It's a lot more milk, and instead of marking it with foam, they're marking it with caramel, and that's how they kind of Americanized the macchiato. But the traditional Italian macchiato, that's going to be this guy. So next up, let's talk about a cortado. They're usually served in these beautiful little glasses, and they're going to be something more like 1 part espresso, 1 part milk. So let's say 2 ounces of espresso and 2 ounces of milk. With cortados, because there's not that much milk, you're still going to get a lot of the complex layers of flavor that are inside your shot of espresso. Again, another drink I really encourage you to try. It's a lot of fun. Next up, in this term, very popular, one of my favorites, the cappuccino. I love cappuccinos because they're incredibly balanced and really delicious. Traditionally, it's going to be 2 ounces of espresso, 2 ounces of milk, 2 ounces of foam. But nowadays, most coffee shops are just steaming their milk like normal latte milk and getting you that thin layer of beautiful foam and latte art on the top of your cappuccino. But again, a cappuccino, that's one of those words that you're going to see, and it might not actually mean a traditional cappuccino. Marketers will use that for different things, but at the end of the day, if we're talking about a traditional Italian menu, it's really about ratios. We're talking about 1 part coffee and 2 parts milk. In other words, a macchiato is espresso and a little bit of milk. A cortado is espresso and more milk. A cappuccino is espresso and more milk than that. Last but not least, and certainly most popular, especially in America, is the latte. Now we're talking about 1 part espresso and more like 4 or 5 parts milk. This is where folks really start to add things like syrups and whatnot. You can get, for example, a caramel latte. You don't have to add that flavor. You don't have to add any syrup. Lattes are delicious just as espresso and milk, but this is where people tend to start adding that kind of stuff, as well as whipped cream and toppings and all kinds of fun stuff. So back to the top. Macchiato, that is coffee and a little bit of milk. Cortado, that's coffee and a little bit more milk. Cappuccino, that's coffee and a little bit more milk. And a latte is coffee and a lot of milk. So all of that said, we started with the question, what is espresso? What's an espresso menu? What does that even mean? And unsurprisingly, as it turns out, the answer is a lot like the answer to the question, what is coffee? It's complicated, but it's also delicious. So I would suggest that the more important question is this. When was the last time that you invited someone to join you for a cup of coffee and you took an opportunity to share in that moment of real joy and friendship while sipping on something you've maybe never tried before? If it's been a while, then allow me to suggest it might do you both more good than you could possibly predict. Thanks for watching.